I would distrust a work, indeed do distrust works, which come easily. I think there's got to be that all-in battle with ignorance, that fight all the time. Otherwise, there's no sense of achievement.
That lack of complacency, that willingness to challenge himself has always been the foundation of Peebles' work. At the core of his art is the interplay of two sets of opposites: order, intellect and purity on the one hand, intuition, passion and complexity on the other. His has been and is the constant striving towards the harmony of opposites. Born in 1922 in New Zealand's Bay of Plenty, he was 2 years old when the family moved to the capital, Wellington, where he enjoyed a comfortable middle-class childhood. His childhood love and talent for art continued into adulthood, and after his service years during World War II, Peebles decided to continue his study of fine arts. Working for the post office, he enrolled in the Wellington Technical College evening and weekend classes. These were, however, culturally conservative times and in New Zealand very much isolated from the excitements of European modernism. In 1950, Peebles saw some posters of paintings by the Fauves. The vibrant colour, tones and surfaces of Matisse, Braque and Derain struck a deep chord.
My first 4 years of study as a student were rigidly academic. Colours were muted. One had to, I suppose, achieve a certain formal, lifeless rigidity. Then coming to face with the work of artists such as the Fauves, who suddenly translated light into terms of colour rather than simply trying to imitate it as we did. Of course you can't with pigment. This was just like a kick in the guts to me. It really rammed things home and made me see that this whole business of art was a language in its own right, not imitative, but a language in its own right with its own specific powers of eloquence and excitement.
The next year he took 3 years' leave from the post office to study full-time in Sydney at the Julian Ashton School of Art. Here was the beginning of a lifelong fascination with the work of Cezanne.
I tried to be Cezanne. I tried to understand him. And it was a hopeless task. I mean, he remains a mystery to me. But what I did get was the realization that a painting had to be structured. It wasn't simply a matter of copying the thing in front of you and trying to make it look as lifelike as possible. But we had a multitudinous and multifarious array of information before us as we looked at nature or looked at the model. We had to select. We had to build our own structures and our own visual organizations through color, through form, through a sense of scale. These were things that were never mentioned earlier.
One consequence of Peebles' immersion in the work of Cezanne was to teach him to see more analytically. This had a profound effect on how he viewed his home city. The Wellington series of the late 50s provides a vivid demonstration of his development.
We lived above Wellington, and I was very familiar for 40 years really with the forces of Wellington, the aggressive nature of the climate, the angular nature of the topography, the sort of excitement and energy of the city. All these things appealed to me very much. I liked that physicality. And that, I suppose, I wasn't trying to illustrate that, but I think that some of that aggressiveness, that fairly brutal color with strong contrasts between light and dark, without any subtle nuance or anything like that. I think this all was evocative of that feeling that I had for Wellington. And it also goes back to Cezanne, you know, the weight, the physical presence.
In 1960, the Wellington series won him an art fellowship of £1,000. That made it possible for him to go to London. Just before he left New Zealand's shores, he married his wife, Prue, who has always been a great support.
Prue, I've just been thinking about this small work on the studio wall. It seems to me to be a bit lost in that big white open space. It needs something of a grander scale. She's been an absolute rock of support in every way. And
what about this one over here?
I can't pay enough tribute to her for the way in which she has eased my path in so many ways. Kept me concentrated and, well, I suppose taken a lot of the burdens from me.
London in 1960 exposed Peebles to the constructive work of Victor Passmore, who, in an article called What is Abstract Art?, argued that painting, to maintain its relevance in the world of new art, had to abandon the frame, shoulder itself out from the flat canvas surface, and project itself into the third dimension.
Here were works which had no obvious, made no obvious references to visual reality as we would normally understand that term. They were very, very logical but highly inventive images, which, although one could not say, well, this is an image of a beach or an apple or something else, they were totally abstract, and yet at the same time there was a familiarity about them. That, and also the lack of decorative incident, the clear, direct and overt sort of way in which these works activated the space around them without any attention being given to triviality.
One of the constant tensions in Don Peebles' art is between the second and third dimensions, between painting on the flat plane and projective structure.
I think, looking back also, I was painting some works, the late Wellington series works, in which I used very heavy textures and pigments building out from the canvas. And here again was this sense, I think, of wanting almost to leave the flat surface of the picture plane, to have the thing coming out towards the viewer, engaging the viewer in a way in which he or she does not only look at the work, but the work is looking back at them. It was this tangible, physical, weighty presence. It was in Cezanne, it was in Passmore's idea of projection, and it's been, in my own way, an abiding interest of mine.
Back in New Zealand, and with a lectureship at the University of Canterbury School of Art, the following years saw the production of two distinct bodies of work. One is a series of ever more refined sculptural reliefs. Relief Construction 1966, the emphatic zones of yellow and black locked in a dynamic synergy. Over the same period, Peebles painted two series of stretched canvas paintings, the Canterbury series and the Linear series. In time, he became dissatisfied with them.
Somehow or other, it didn't hold me. I think it was too pre-planned, it was too ordered. The works were, I think, essentially too well behaved. Everything was just right in terms of interaction of colour and shape and so forth. And I felt, I suppose, that life wasn't really like that. And so this is when I started to break through that and try to fracture my own expectations, as it were, in painting. And I think in a way I've returned to something a little bit more like the Wellington series, with that sort of weighty, almost brutality about the work. I like to leave a lot for the viewer to resolve or find a resolution for. I don't want to serve him or her with something already cut and dried and ready to wear, as it were.
In the late 70s, Peebles began to use the canvas relief elements that are so central to his later painting. In a 1975 work, untitled Combine Painting, he uses for the first time a tongue of canvas which sags out from the painting's surface. Through continuing experimentation, he achieved the major resolution of his later large canvas reliefs. This process of freeing up is epitomized spectacularly in Untitled 1978-79, a monumental painting culminating in a violent red X.
Wanted to try to balance all this intricacy and physical length with one statement which was so declarative, but at the same time so very different, that one challenged the other, but ultimately it had to come together as a unity, a sort of harmony of opposites. I tried to find in that red cross something which was coloristically and formally so very different from the thematic development going across the other area of the canvas, and yet at the same time bring them together with a chord like bang.
The 80s were yet a new phase. After 2 decades of apparently austere abstract practice, there was now lyricism, warmth and expression back in his art. What was now to emerge were his increasingly rich and dynamic canvas reliefs and his masterpiece, untitled A2. The title gives nothing away, but the work is hugely evocative. Almost predatory in mood, it hovers massively above the viewer, threatening to envelop with its outspread wings.
I was once asked by a person at an exhibition of mine what my work meant, and I said, I do them, I don't accompany them. I'm sure that person thought that was a cop-out, but I want to, I don't want a person to leave the work thinking, oh, well, I've summed that one up, you know. I want there to be something there which has some compelling interest, which nags away perhaps at the viewer, as indeed it has always to me. I don't see art as a sort of soft society sedative. I see it always as an ongoing and challenging and dynamic activity.
In the evolution of his works of art, Peebles is constantly self-challenging. The physical process begins with drawing.
I find that the more or the less I interfere with the white page, the better the drawing. And I like these ones because they're very economical, and yet they express my feeling. You can't point to one of my drawings and say, yes, now if you look over there, this is a drawing of that. You see the farmhouse on the right-hand side? And it's got a green roof. Well, there it is there, you see. So the drawings are really just evoke feelings that I have about nature, usually strongly related to nature's energy rather than its passive side. So the lines bounce and dart, and they pick out shapes and articulate things of interest to me.
Peebles then moves on to work with maquettes of plain white paper.
I think the importance of the maquette is that it's a speedy process. So I can toss around lots of different possibilities in an hour or so. And this helps not to build up a fixed image in my head as to what a final large work will look like, but just gets me, if in a sense, like warming up before a game of tennis, gets the process going and allows me to move flexibly from one idea to another.
What are you starting to explore when you start to draw on the maquette?
Well, I'm starting to dirty up the image in a sense, get away from the purity of the white paper. I'm also looking at different ways in which tonal change can be used. I'm playing around with ideas of actual cast shadow and a type of shadow which is implied, it's illusionistic in one sense. And I find that before moving directly into colour, some consideration of light and dark contrast is very helpful for me.
It's going to change the relationships once you move to the larger canvas. So it's starting to become actually a very, not a totally different work, but a different work.
It does become a very different work. The final resolution of the bigger one has to be done on that big scale, on that big size. It can't just be followed as an architect might follow a blueprint. Even while making the big work, I'm still will revert to drawings and making paper maquettes again. In other words, what I'm saying is that the whole process is not a purely linear one. Very often I find I have to get away from the big work, which is worrying me in all sorts of different ways, and I'll do a life drawing, or even go out and draw something in the landscape, just to get away from it for a while, do something else, and hopefully come back with some fresh ideas. That display wall at the end of my studio is a constantly changing resource.
Once you come to paint the canvas, what are the things that determine your choice of colour?
Sometimes nothing more than I feel like using blue today. But I also think a lot of Picasso's wonderful statement. Again, I suppose it relates to the need to upset our own expectations. And I use it a lot myself too. And the statement was, if I feel I must have red in this corner of the canvas, I use green.
What considerations are you keeping in mind as you adjust or disturb the paint surfaces?
I'm always looking for a sense of unity, but not a trite and easy unity. I have to be surprised by the work. I have to have a feeling that I've never been quite in that position before, and I'm not simply replicating another Peebles work. And as one enters into this battle or this engagement with the work, you do things and the work speaks back to you. The work says, no, I feel comfortable here. And it's almost as if you're having a conversation with it, and it will tell you when you have done something which it feels uncomfortable with. They become quite living presences as far as I'm concerned, not inert bits of canvas.
And are you at this stage of a work still referring back to the maquettes and the drawings?
Not in any very regular way. I'll sometimes glance at something, but essentially no, now I'm involved in this. This is the work. This work is ultimately going to be seen on its own and not in relationship to any other small works. It's got to stand on its own 2 feet.
Do you ever see a work as being finished to some state of perfection for you?
Not finished. I hate the word finished in that sense. But obviously works do at times reach a stage in which I think, well, I can go no further. I don't say to myself, is it any good? Because I'd be afraid of the answer. But I will say, well, for the moment, I can accept it. I'll leave it at this stage. I think I can accept what I've done. But in no way am I finished with that idea. And yet, as I said earlier, there's a multifarious and multitudinous array of all sorts of different information bombarding us all the time. My job, as I see it as an artist, is to recognize those things and yet find the inner harmony within them.